at some of the statistical tests that you could perform and when to use them. So in order to know what type of test to pick, you need to be clear on a couple of things. You need to know what the purpose of your test is, the types of data that you have in your test, whether your test data is paired or unpaired, and whether you know the parameters to your test or not. For your purpose then, you need to establish whether you're looking to make a comparison or calculate some kind of difference, or whether you are trying to confirm some kind of relationship between your two data sets. For the types of data, we have 4 that we covered in the previous video, but what we're interested in here is knowing whether our data is categorical, that is discrete, or some form of continuous data. You might need to be aware of whether your data is paired or not. So paired data looks at 2 features from each individual unit in your sample. So that could be something like 2 separate features for each person you ask about, or maybe it's the same sample looked at 2 different times. Unpaired data, by contrast then, is sometimes called independent data because it's looking at 2 completely separate groups and trying to look at relationships between them. Finally, whether or not your data follows a known distribution dictates whether you can use a parametric test or not. Parametric because you know the parameters that define your population. That's often because some previous bit of research has been completed on the topic, or it's some known feature about the population. Often there's an assumption that at least one of your variables is normally distributed here. Otherwise, so either because you don't have any previous research on the topic, your parameters aren't known, or because your variables aren't normally distributed, we'd need to use a non-parametric test. Knowing which of these features our data has will make picking a statistical test, of course, much easier. In the case where you are looking to make a comparison between 2 sets of categorical data, we are somewhat limited, but there are a couple of simple accessible tests, such as the sign test, that can help us understand the differences between our data sets. Hopefully, because we've got categorical tests, we're wanting to establish a relationship. We can use a chi-squared test in those cases. So for our categorical data, in the vast majority of situations, for a comparison, it's a sign test, and for a relationship, it's a chi-squared test. There are a few tests for establishing a relationship between continuous data. The first is Pearson's correlation, and the second is Spearman's rank correlation. Which one of those you use technically depends on whether you know the parameters of your data. So Pearson's if you do, and Spearman's if you don't. If we're looking for a comparison or a difference in continuous data, we first need to think about whether our data is paired or unpaired. So for unpaired or independent data, we'd use a independent or student's t-test or a Mann-Whitney test, depending on whether or not your data is parametric. Again, so there's that. Do you know the parameters of your population or not? For paired data, we're going to use a paired t-test or a Wilcoxon test, again, depending on whether you know the parameters or not. Each subject may only require you to know about some of these tests, so make sure you check your subject specifications to confirm which ones you need.